Welcome to SFL On Air. I am here with Aaron Morton.
Yep.
All right, you can find him on Facebook. Or do you have a Twitter, Aaron?
I do have a Twitter. I just never use it.
So if you would like to send messages to Aaron that are never replied to, then you know where to go. You can be passive-aggressive. You can say mean things to him on Twitter. He won't even know.
I honestly don't really care for Twitter, so it makes sense. I even have an Instagram account. Never use it. Never once. Like, I have one picture on there. It was like a sandwich I made one morning where the mustard came out looking like Arabic lettering. I was worried that was ISIS.
Probably not. If that is the indication, then that would mean they are somehow infiltrated your brain.
Oh, crap.
Subconsciously.
It's the chemicals in the water, man.
This is some Alex Jones. You need to go tell Alex Jones about this. I guarantee he'll make it into a story.
I want to tell him about my conspiracy theory about Canada. Have I told you about that?
You have not.
So, way back in high school, I made up this fake conspiracy theory. It's fake, so no one take me seriously on this. I do not legitimately believe this. I just use this to make fun of conspiracy theorists. And I have this theory that Canadians are secretly plotting to invade the United States. And my reasoning is simple. They're too dang nice. Okay, you know who's too nice? People hiding something. That thief that just stole something from your store, yeah, they're being nice because they don't want you to be suspicious of them. Be suspicious of them. Don't trust the maple syrup. Or the moose gang.
There's no reason for them to be nice to each other at that point. And you could argue that they are faking their niceness to other people. But then, how would socialism work in Canada? The only way socialism is going to work is if everyone is extremely nice, completely compliant, does their job. If Canadians were secretly not nice, their socialist policies would just fall apart.
Well, they are nice to each other. Like, have you not seen South Park? I'm just saying, that's the gospel there. They are trying to tell us something on South Park with their Canadian portrayals. Just saying. They're all ran by the Canadian devil. Just saying.
All right, so Aaron, I need to vent on you. Can I vent on you? Can I use you
Go ahead.
as an outlet for my frustration?
Sure.
All right, here's my problem. SFL On Air, this whole project, it's going to get better, but it's taking time. I bought a really nice microphone. But the problem is, I can't use any of this stuff I'm buying because my computer isn't running it. My computer isn't able to use it, so I can't even use the materials I bought, Aaron. The software takes up too much room on my computer.
That's a bit of a problem, isn't it?
It is. So right now I'm using my laptop's regular microphone, Audacity, to record this podcast.
Maybe you should invest in like a what is it? Not a laptop, but an actual PC. Maybe that's all the problem. Honestly, I know squat about computers, which means I'm probably screwed when automation takes all the economists' jobs. But that is a bit of a problem, ain't it?
It is. So those are my qualms. That's my frustration. I'm just leaving it out there. And really, that was just a long reason to make people feel bad for me. And go donate to patreon.com/SFLOnAir so I can get a nice computer. You could have less money and I could have more money. Doesn't that sound great?
We're investing our capital to get happiness from you creating a product. We should be investing in you to give to us. That's what we're doing. We're not helping you get richer. We're helping ourselves. That's the beauty of capitalism, isn't it?
Isn't happiness all about sacrifice? I think I read that somewhere. Imagine yourself having less money. That's my pitch.
What is it? What's the name of that one philosopher? Was it Schopenhauer that believes that life is just pure suffering and that's all we should be doing? Or something like I can't think. I think it was.
Yes, of course, that guy. He was a genius. Genius man. Your life already sucks. Just give me $1. Go give me $1.
Well, I'm a poor college student. I need to pay for tuition some way, and I'm already donating. Well, you know what? After this, I'll make sure I give a couple dollars to you. I can't afford much, but I'll try my best.
All right.
I'll make my life worse to help you.
I'm appealing to my audience, a bunch of existential philosophers.
If Buddha is right, their suffering will give them a higher place in whatever the next life is or whatever.
Well, our consciousness examines memories, and if we have a memory of a hardship and then a memory of gaining something from it, I think there's not much option except for in our minds to equate that result as something extraordinary because of all the suffering that we went through for it. And that provides a sense of, I guess, satisfaction. That's where, does that make sense?
Sounds deep. Not really my cup of tea.
Yes. What do you do for happiness?
Well, when it comes to happiness, I'm actually, ethically, I consider myself a utilitarian. I believe, as a society, we should focus on policies and ideals that benefit the well-being of as many individuals as possible. And happiness is part of that, but Bentham didn't really look past the fact that, what brings one person happiness brings another person misery. And that's the reason why John Stuart Mill sort of extends to the idea that, focus on making well-being rather than just happiness. Because with well-being will come happiness, and that's what I believe we should be focused on in society. So I do believe that happiness is a very good goal in the end.
Here's a question for you. If socialism was possible, a government that was able to provide for everyone's means without being corrupt, would you agree with it, or do you still disagree with it?
If it had economic feasibility to it. But luckily enough, no evidence shows that, though. But yeah, I would agree to socialism if there was evidence to show it would operate properly.
What's your qualms with the economics? Why doesn't it work economically?
Well, starting out with the economic calculation problem that Hayek proposed actually does make a very good point. That socialist governments can't properly distribute resources, and that's the reason why we need a private sector to help distribute those resources for it. Granted, there are some areas where the government can control more effectively. I consider myself, to an extent, a minarchist. I do believe rather classical liberal. I believe the government should provide law and order, military, and education. When people think socialism, they immediately think now Denmark and Norway. Yeah, if you look at them, they're not really the most socialist state out there. Literally, they have actually one of the freest the Scandinavian countries most of them have freer economies than us, from what I remember last checked. Yeah, they have a massive welfare state, but they've also been sort of a reform. And Finland is actually.
Yes, I talk about this in a live stream called "Why Less Government Doesn't Equal More Freedom."
I saw the live stream you did on Facebook about that. And actually, we talked about government being spontaneous order. Thomas, you may have seen my comment. I don't know if you did. Thomas Paine actually does bring up a similar idea to that in Common Sense.
Okay, the last thing I heard was you saying Thomas Paine brought up an argument in Common Sense.
As much as I would like to continue my Thomas Paine talk, I was really hoping to bring I don't know if you want to proceed on to Georgism or not.
Let's go on to Georgism now. I'm going to explain. We had some connection issues, so that's why we're going to cut that conversation short.
Yeah.
But you can go on to the other video if you want to hear more about why Sweden is actually very free. But we're going to go on to Georgism. And my basic understanding of Georgism is that, and that's why I said I think I might be a Georgist, because I don't understand it that well. Surely not as well as you do. But my basic understanding is that people get to earn the labor or the resources of their labor, but that land is not explicitly owned.
That is one of the tenets there. You actually got one of the main tenets. That is, I wouldn't say it's the top tenet, but you're actually very close to what is actually the big crux of Georgism. In fact, what your argument is actually what got me into Georgism. In fact, before I came to Georgism, I was thinking that very idea. It was the reason why I was actually, when I was in ANCAP, I was leaning toward mutualism for a while. But again, I digress. So, Georgism has a problem with what we call economic rent. And it's where people use the land value to, make money. And I like to put it, use this thought experiment. Henry George in Progress and Poverty, which I recommend everyone read. It was actually considered the third most influential book of all time, after, the Bible and Atlas Shrugged. And he gives this thought experiment. Imagine you have a plot of land in the middle of nowhere. You buy that plot of land from, who knows, government, an individual for $10, maybe $100. Over time, people start building roads next to it. People will build housing, industry, shopping centers, schools, police departments, fire departments, and over time, there'll come a town, a city, and a metropolis around this plot of land you bought for $100. And over time, through the labor of other people, the value of that land is going to increase. So by the time the city is finally developed, your land has gone from $100 to thousands, and you didn't even contribute a dime into that value. And that was the biggest issue Henry George had with economic rent. And in fact, it's actually an argument that's as old as Adam Smith. Adam Smith actually talked about that in Wealth of Nations, where he mentioned how a landlord can literally make money by doing nothing with the land. And all of them have proposed the same idea of land value tax. But the central idea is that Georgists don't like people owning land value they didn't make. In fact, it's one of the most parasitical, one of the most unjust things in the economy to exist. But that's the general idea, the base idea of Georgism.
How do you feel about intellectual property?
Well, so Henry George, he actually was against intellectual property and copyrights. Me personally, I actually flip-flop on it. I do recognize the issues that it does hinder product, but at the same time, you have to figure out, well, if they don't get the money back for it, what's going to induce an innovation? I currently lean slightly against it, or at least massively reforming it so that you don't have corporations that can lobby Congress to extend copyrights another 50 years or whatever. But on the base, I lean against it. It does also hinder innovation in its own right by causing an individual monopoly on an idea.
Well, because my argument against the land ownership would be that it would be an investment on the land, so you could argue that it was the person's investment, which I would put as intellectual property. They own the right to their thoughts, they own the right to their strategies, they own the right to their investment on the land for the purpose of it increasing in value. However, in the case that you brought up is extremely particular because it's talking about something that would have been unbeknownst to both the people around them and the person buying the house at that time. If you buy a house in where the community hasn't been developed yet. So that's a very good argument in that particular case where it's like, okay, that's not fair. You bought a house for a penny before society existed, and then once society existed, now your house is worth $1 million because of the land value. But I would argue that in the exemplification that we are in, it's not an example, it's the reality that we're in right now, that problem doesn't exactly exist. Society is developed to a point where those cases aren't going to happen, and if they do happen, it's mostly because people are making wise investment choices on their properties.
Well, what you're talking is actually, so that wise investment choice is particularly called specifically rent sinking, and it is an investment, but you're investing on hoping that other people will do the work for you. So if you buy, predicting that the government will, build a school nearby, you buy a house in the middle of, a ghetto, knowing that the school that's built nearby will increase the value, is still, you're relying on everyone else to fund that school, and you just skip away with the profits with it. And that's another issue. Like, yeah, the idea with, empty plot land, it doesn't necessarily just need to be an empty plot land. It can be, again, a rundown house in the middle of a neighborhood that's about to be gentrified. It can be applied, even today, put it that way.
All right. Well, I'm all with you on this. So I guess from this point, it would just be, what are the logical implementations and logical implications of having incremental changes that go towards this philosophy of Georgism right now in the United States? What are things that would move towards the logical consistency of earning your labor, but not your land?
Henry George, and despite his idea of wanting to socialize land, he was not a socialist. In fact, in Private Property, he says that the realization of what laissez-faire means immediately wakes one up from the reality of the noble dreams of socialism. It makes you realize that socialism can't work because it prevents free trade, it prevents free exchange of labor, services, and capital. So he was ardently against any tax on capital, labor, investment. He believed that you should own what you produced and made. But since land value is not produced by you or owned by anyone, you shouldn't be able to keep all of it. And that's where the land value tax comes in. He believed that the only just tax is a land value tax. For that very reason, it should be the only tax. The question is, though, how do we progress towards that? And, of course, we wouldn't want to, flip the switch, go overnight. That would be insane. How many people probably lose homes quickly?
Yes. Here's my problem with what a lot of people assume when people tell them their political ideology, and even what people who have a political ideology may not even understand themselves. is that when you adhere to a political philosophy that you think is logically consistent, usually the ideas in and of itself spur creative ideas and structural ideas that are beneficial for society. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you want everything to change to go directly towards that political philosophy overnight.
Yeah. What is it? I have the same discussion with my uncle all the time when I talk about my radical ideas. He immediately thinks I want to flip the switch, and I always have to tell him, no, I don't want to flip the switch. It needs to be gradual. It's insane that people, like, revolution will never achieve anything unless it's, planned out and gradual. For the most part, a land value tax should be implemented, but gradually. Like, we should, increase, for every percent we increase, most estimates put that we can actually fund the U.S. government with just a 10% tax on land values, which would actually lower the tax for around 99% of all Americans. So, just incrementals, lower all other taxes, by a certain increment that associates with a similar increment in land value tax. That way it's gradual, allowing, also landowners, quickly move around their resources and prepare for that final institution of land value tax.
Yes, but if I'm arguing as a Georgist, appealing to Georgist ideology, does the government own the right to that land? Or the value?
I would argue not. Again, Georgists believe the land is everyone's, not just the political elite, not the corporate elite. Everyone owns that land, and the land value tax sort of acts as a way to make sure that that land value is distributed fairly to where it's needed, so that everyone can benefit. No, the government doesn't automatically earn it. In fact, if I were to become president, I would actually have a plan where I would actually liberate all unused government land to be used for individuals if they so choose to homestead it with land value tax to limit expansion, which would be most ideal. Georgists, again, believe that land is owned by everyone, per se.
So here's where we're going to disagree on Georgism. I am a strong believer that radical changes towards governmental structures, are not good no matter what they are. Even in regarding turning a communist nation into a capitalist nation, I'm a very strong believer in using the structure that we already have and making it the best type of structure it can possibly be. If you have Denmark and Canada that are socialist, make it the best type of socialism you can under the framework of a philosophy that's logically consistent. So I would be looking for things that respect the idea of this philosophy, and I don't know why I'm having trouble thinking of any right now, that are very easily implementable in a bill, so to speak, without so for example, I'm looking for step one, and I don't think that's step one.
Probably step one would actually be more doing it locally, if anything.
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Like, Georgism applied locally would actually be very effective. In fact, there are several towns in Pennsylvania, the home state of Henry George, have implemented. I believe there's one town that actually has seen moderate success. I know Denmark has a form of the land value tax, but they don't really use it the way it should be. They use it as well as a property tax, which, again, doesn't really solve any problems. Again,
all right, I got it. You've inspired me, Aaron. You've inspired me. This is my idea. Okay, feel free to shit on it if you think it's a bad idea. All right, so we have a city. What city do you live in?
I live in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Las Vegas, Nevada. You're already close. Okay, so you don't pay any city taxes, do you?
I think there's a property tax. I don't own a house. I actually live in a house, but I don't own it.
So there's. I'm sorry. Continue.
I think there's a property tax here in the city, though. Not that I remember, though, specifically.
So there's cities, and cities are run by mayors, and then you have the mayor and whatever people help the mayor. That whole ordeal eliminates all city taxes, everything that goes to the mayor and that administration, eliminate all taxes there, and turn it into a city tax, which is based on the fact that based on land. So the city tax goes there. At which point, you don't. At which point, that money you have a collector, and the how should I say this? I'm trying to think of a way where people are able to you pay the tax, and it goes into a website, and that website has two options. Okay, it's either going to automatically use the money for city needs, or you have the option to delegate where the money goes yourself. So you can go in and you can change the option from automatic to roads or
so it's sort of a pseudo-voluntary system.
Yes, a pseudo-voluntary system. And the only purpose of the city would be to make sure people pay their funds. I am not so sure as a collection agency as much as because here's the one problem with the website is who owns the website, and how do you make sure the whatever bank account is going into is safe and people aren't taking money from it deceitfully.
All right.
But I guess you have the same problem with what the city is right now. How do we know how the money is being spent?
My problem with people deciding whether I believe that most people would actually choose the idea where to distribute the funds. My issue is that people might not do it in a way that would be actually most effective.
Oh, I completely disagree, because I think that 90% of people are not even going to go onto the website and change the default option. They're just going to leave the default option.
American laziness for the win, right? Well, those that do, though, I think wouldn't they would distribute. If they're if they're a parent, they would probably focus more on education. If they're a cop, they would try to help them, help the police department the most. That's my main issue with it. That would be an interesting system, though, and I would be intrigued to see where it goes. But
well, there could be a cap for each. Like this one can't go to $1 million. This is the maximum it can receive. Type of thing.
But the issue, bringing that up, the issue with that then with the land value tax is that not everyone's going to pay it. It's going to be either landlords that own buildings. They're going to do their own way. Granted, though, it might work better in Vegas, where Vegas is just essentially one ginormous suburb. But bigger cities like New York City, where landlords own buildings that house thousands of people in one 100 square feet of land. So that is my main issue, is that since the land value tax is usually focused more on landlords than individuals, that a pseudo-voluntary system like proposing would cause that issue. In the end, I think it might be better just allow the city to decide where it goes, which, granted, that means people have to focus on voting for people they care about. But you have a good point. It just wouldn't, in my mind, work properly with land value tax necessarily.
All right, here's what I would say, and I think it essentially what it means is a realization that what the city is using money for must be atrocious. They must be doing it terribly, because the only argument that we have that the city is using the money effectively is the proof that firemen exist and police stations exist and libraries exist. But from any logical argument that you make, like if we didn't have the city and I came up with the philosophical notion of the city, you would have a problem. Well, what if they don't spend it right? Which is exactly what we're having with this idea that people delegate the money. But what's the difference between people voting for people who elect people who delegate the money? Is there really any difference?
So you're essentially just want to cut the middleman and just get straight to the point. And I do see that. And to be fair, here in the fine city of Clark, in the fine county of Clark County, where the government, so in Las Vegas, technically the city isn't the entire city I live in. I actually live in a suburb that isn't part of the city, but it's mostly controlled by the county. And the county does not do that good of a job, so you do have a good point where you're saying that. But again, with land value tax, my main issue would be that landlords would decide that mostly. It would, I guess, there would have to be a solution for that problem, and maybe like if you live in a certain building, then everyone gets a certain share of the taxes are produced by that building. So if you own, let's say, a small apartment that houses 2,000 people in New York City, and you pay, let's say, $10,000 in land value tax, and every citizen would that means they all get only like $2 a choice there.
Okay.
Well, a land value the land value tax on a building like that would probably be significantly high, but for the most part, it would be a couple $100 per citizen. So that would actually maybe be a good solution to the problem I bring up. But that's a good idea, though.
Why isn't walking on a sidewalk? Why don't you have to pay for that? You're using the land.
Oh well, the government built that land. To be fair, wait, who doesn't? Oh crap! I may be having a dirt moment here. I would say it depends on the sidewalk. Well, granted, the government, if they built the sidewalk, then again, since you paid for the taxes to build the sidewalk, you might as well have the right to walk on it.
Let's say, but if I don't own a house, I'm still using land. Everyone on the earth is in some way using land.
Yeah.
So should they be taxed for that?
I do not think so, because again, since the land is owned by everyone, using the Georgia's arguments, then arguably they would technically be just walking on what the government has produced for the citizens through the land value tax. Which,
all right,
again,
that's fair.
Since everyone contributes to a land value, then everyone fairly is contributing in some way to that producing the sidewalk, if it's government built. Arguably, you can argue that a private corporation can build that sidewalk and make you pay for it, but I think in those cases, most people wouldn't like that corporation, right?
Yes, okay. So what percent tax would you propose on taxing people who own land?
Land. So let's quickly get away the notion land value tax is not a property tax. We do not want to tax your home. We want to tax the land that the home sits on. That home was yours. You bought it or built it. It's yours, and that is undisputable. It's land we have an issue.
You're paying for private property, so to speak.
Yes. Oh yes. In fact, in Property Poverty, in the prologue written by Henry George's granddaughter, she actually makes a brilliant point. And she starts out mentioning, I do not want people to believe that I'm falling for the trap of communism and socialists. No, Georges firmly believe in private property, in private ownership of the means of production, capital, and enterprise. Our issue is, again, with privilege induced by government allowing rent sinking and economic rent to continue that hurts the poorest in our society, that negatively impacts the economy by inefficiently distributing resources. So land back tax would solve that issue.
Yes.
And most estimates, so it's interesting, I was actually thinking about this earlier if this was brought up. So there's a lot of speculation on how much could we make. Originally when it was first proposed, a lot of comments like, holy crap, this might make more money than the government would ever need. What should we do? Now a lot of comments are saying, well, it might not do that because, granted, spending today is ridiculously high. But for the most part, so if anyone has the time, I recommend searching the site. It's a party in Britain that runs usually at least 3 seats every election there. It's called the Young People's Party. It's a Georgia's party, and they actually have a list of counter-arguments for every major argument brought up against the land value tax, and it's a very brilliant site to go read. Again, Young People's Party. It's a UK party. And most estimates say that a good 10% tax would be able to do that. Max 10 would be most effective using the Lafner curve.
Okay.
It wouldn't induce people to not build the land, but it also at the same time, reduce the negative effects of land value.
Yes.
That is great. So a 10% tax would do that effectively. It is unknown how effectively, though, it can raise. How much it would raise in the end. Again, we'll just have to find out when we institute it. For the most part, though, most economists actually think that a land value tax would literally fund itself.
We'll find out what's in the bill after we pass it.
Yes. No, legitimately, there's actually a lot of economics on this. There was actually economists in the 70s that actually decided to study a land value tax and found it's actually self-funding itself. Because he actually found out that since the land value tax is based on land value, and as the government uses the tax to help, produce services, it increases the land value, that then increases the amount of revenue the land value tax produces.
What I like about this is that, let me repeat that. What I like about Georgism is that it solves the anarcho-capitalist anarchist minarchist debate, because essentially that whole debate is people having a practical problem with anarchy and anarchists making a logically consistent argument that it's not philosophically sound to take away people's money that they've earned for the utility of the government. However, Georgism is philosophically consistent in it's not taking away any value, and it still allots for the utilization of practicality in a government.
Yeah, it's a brilliant tax. Again, it's been universally claimed by almost every economist. The only two economists I know of, and I wouldn't even call them economists, that were against it was Marx and Rothbard. Marx just called it, it's just the capitalists trying, exploit us one last time before they fail. And Rothbard made this convoluted argument saying, it promotes the labor theory of value and objective value, even though it really doesn't. But for the most part, Milton Friedman said it's the least bad tax. Leo Tolstoy, praised it again. Across the aisle, Winston Churchill, in fact, was a very big supporter of the land value tax in his early political years.
Yes.
In fact, there's this really funny quote where he talks about it, mentioning the arguments just make no sense against it. Leo Tolstoy said it very well. There's two types of people in this world: those who haven't read Henry George, and those who have. And those who have are usually the ones that agree and actually are Georges.
Yes.
Again, read Progress and Poverty. It's a brilliant book. Like, by the time you finish just the intro, you're going to be thinking, he might have a point.
Yes, I'm going to definitely read it. Here,
and he actually makes a very good point in the intro. Like, I live in Vegas, and Vegas is one of the most economically diverse cities in the U.S. I've argue. It's a city where literally the difference between the haves and have-nots is literally a crosswalk. We have these glamorous hotels and casinos just lining the strip. But you just go across the street and you can be looking at a rundown, collapsing motel that's barely open. And it's really interesting. And in Progress and Poverty, he makes an interesting point. And he points out, this is where the name Progress and Poverty comes. He notes that we live in an era of insurmountable wealth, production, where we can have a freshly slaughtered sheep in New Zealand be cooked and eaten in England in a week. We live in an era that has these ungodly machines that can produce copious amounts of products that makes everyone better off, and yet we have insurmountable poverty in the lowest classes that just doesn't make sense when we have so much wealth. And, he makes a point, in older, if you go out of the country or land values are lower, you see that, people aren't necessarily well off, but they're not terribly well off. Even the most wealthy person has to work every day to stay wealthy. And as let's say, we take a random farm town in the middle of Iowa. I don't know why I chose Iowa. I farmland Iowa, and watch as this town progresses, as it becomes industrialized, as, commerce builds up. And you notice a wedge just comes straight between classes and just becomes stronger and stronger. And he doesn't deny the poor people are, living like kings did in the 11th century. Like, it is amazing how, even the poorest person has all this stuff. But at the same time, they often can't afford health care, good housing. And he tries, and that's what he believes is the problem with, the land value, is that land value really induces that problem. And that's just in the intro. Like, I'm living here in Las Vegas, I seen that firsthand. And it really clicked with me. And I'm actually enjoying it. Again, absolutely a brilliant read. Everyone should read Progress and Poverty. Just the intro alone, you'll immediately be hooked. But that's enough of my little rant there. Continue with whatever you have to say.
Well, yes, how do I say this? I haven't found any logical inconsistencies with Georgism, with the exception of a semantics argument, where I could say that all the government wants is to tax people, and they want to take our money and our things, and they will try to find any reason whatsoever in order to tax us. And this is just a...
So taxation is theft.
Yes.
Well, the
And
thing is, a land value tax isn't theft.
I know
And
it isn't theft, but how many things can we think of that we could say, oh, taxing that isn't technically theft, such as life or, I mean, it's the only thing I can think of right now is land, but I'm sure there's other examples.
well, I would say there's actually very few examples, but the most effective tax is a land value tax. It is not theft because, again, you didn't produce the value, so why should you keep the value and profit from what you didn't create? That's the reason why it isn't theft. Granted, one can argue it may be extortion, but again, I would argue it's giving back what everyone created for you. You know, again, you own the house, you built the house, and the value of the house is yours, but again, not the natural resources, not the dirt and soil. That value has come from everyone and nature herself, and that's the reason why it isn't necessarily theft. Again, I'm probably going to see comments about, ANCAP saying, something about, well, still, you have to be forced to pay for it, and what can you do if you can't afford to pay the tax?
Well, here's the thing, you don't need to own a house.
Exactly. Well, it's funny. The argument that, what about the old lady that owns the mansion that can't afford the tax is as old as Georgism itself.
She has a mansion.
What?
She has a mansion.
Well, it's funny. And Winston Churchill actually has a specific quote where he literally says, oh, not this filthy argument again. And he mentions, yeah, that's going to happen, but in the short term. In the short term, as, land quickly, realigns itself, as landowners immediately, abandon the property in the middle of nowhere that they're hoping gets value, they're going to focus more on cities. And this is actually another brilliant thing about land value tax. It is environmentally friendly because it induces landowners to build up rather than out. Use the land they already are using rather than buying random land in the middle of nowhere and developing there. We'll have more land for farms, more land for, preserving nature, which I think is a legitimate role of government.
What about floating houses?
Okay, so
they occupy space.
One of the biggest things about Georgism, so the reason why Georgism works is because land is constant. It is near perfectly inelastic. And that is now in these days where terraforming is becoming a thing, that might be an interesting thing to observe. The effects will still not be that much different. It'll just end up, landowners not developing as much land, but still, floating houses are still technically running on, land. So actually argue with things. So we have to talk about land as an economic term. When people think land, you immediately think, a mountain or, property in the city. Land in economic terms is actually just natural resources. Anything that isn't produced by man. So the ocean, the entire ocean is land economically. So even a floating house would technically be taxed in some way. Probably not that much, because who wants to live out in the middle of the ocean for who knows how long?
If there was a floating city, that immediately creates new land that wasn't there before. Because what's it sitting on? It's sitting on something that helps it float. And let's say it's floating by rockets, or like it's literally just floating in the sky. Then there's for all intents and purposes, theoretical space right below it that other people can't go on or use. It's occupying that space. And you're not taxing the entire dimensionality of the space. You're just taxing, you kind of are. Just the...
I would argue in that case with the floating city, since, the floating city doesn't take up any land, so why should it be taxed with land? Granted, this argument means that 1,000 years from now, when, everything is Georgian, we're just going to have a bunch of floating cities. But still, that city was produced by whoever produced it. Granted, it'll probably be very expensive to live in, but it doesn't...
If people fly a lot, if there's a lot of people that are always up in the air, you could argue that it would be it would be a very cheap tax, because you are taking away the ability for people to go into that space. And that space, that's a
good point. That's a good point.
But if not many people are in the air a lot, and you're not preventing somebody from going into that space because nobody goes up there anyway, then it would be just a very, very, very small, insignificant tax. And that's where the whole land value thing comes in. The more people want to be in that area, the higher the tax would be.
Yeah. That is an interesting point. Granted, that's like how far in the future. So we do not know how that's going to apply. Again, most economists think only now. They don't, think future. That's the reason, like the internet was this groundbreaking economic thing. But that doesn't apply to automation. That's a different argument.
Yes.
Final thoughts.
My final thought is another question, okay? Because I'm very big in future implications. That's just how my mind works. So, two things. When somebody from a foreign area comes into a new territory or a new area, what are the implications as to one person's right to the land versus theirs based on them living there? So kind of like the border question. And if aliens visit Earth, what is their claim to the land as people who did not have inherent pretend rights to the land because they weren't born there? They were born in outer space.
So you're sort of now applying this like a universal scale, I'm guessing?
Yes.
I would argue that
both on a yeah, they're connected. Both the United States versus Mexico versus Canada issue and the universe. They're both connected.
I would argue Georgists believe that everything is owned by every sentient being. Just because, you were born there doesn't mean it isn't yours. You were born on this planet. You were born in this universe. You have a natural right to the product of nature herself.
So now you're saying that if I can go to court and firmly establish a person as a non-sentient being, I can take away their claim to own land?
That's an interesting... Well, how can you argue someone's a non-sentient being if they're like... Well, if they're not a sentient being, how did they get the claim to begin with? I don't know...
That's true. There would have to be an example where a non-sentient being was...
Like the crazy old baroness that gives her land to her cat kind of thing?
Yes.
Oh, well, there's another question. What is the definition of sentience? Can we argue that, all animals are sentient? But that just gets, even more philosophical implications that it's not really in my realm. I'm getting more economics and political philosophy based in actual, ethical and metaphysical arguments, and that would be something I would have to read about. I don't know where I was going with what I was going to say, but continue.
Yes, so we're going to end the conversation there. If you would like to add Aaron and talk to him about Georgism on Facebook, Aaron Morton, message him. I'm sure he will talk to you. It doesn't seem like he has anything better to do than have conversations about Georgism with you.
I just want to throw this out here. My full name on Facebook is Aaron Spencer Morton. I also run a Georgist meme page called Gorgeous Georgist Meme, so if you want to like that, go on ahead. Non-guilty self-appraisal there, just saying.
And you can find SFL On Air on YouTube, on Facebook, facebook.com/SFL On Air, and be sure to tune in to YouTube every Tuesday night for a new episode.